Hello, namaste, and you're actually welcome to the course of Tamil Nadu History 12th class. So, we have already covered the Tamil Nadu History 11th class in a separate video, and which is being uploaded in a separate playlist on YouTube, which you can find. And here we are going to cover the Tamil Nadu History 12th class. This book is particularly about the time when Europeans have already entered India. Okay, and specifically here we'll be talking about the British East India Company, like their governor generals, like who all came, what happened in whose tenure, and the entire freedom struggle starting from the time like 1770s till the 1947 when finally India gained its independence. Okay, so it's a very long journey because it's almost a 200 to 150 years journey, and you and me are going to be together covering this entire book in as less time as possible, but with more enthusiasm and more energy. Okay, so I want you to take this course as a revision course, so that you play this course and you start revising in your head whatever you have studied in the Tamil Nadu book or any other history book. Okay, since we have we are making another lecture for entire history as well, where ancient, medieval, and modern will be covered in greater detail, not only just Tamil Nadu book. So I request you that I'll be referring you to the points wherever I feel that this has been covered in another course in much more detail. So you can go back to that course and watch that particular lecture also. In that way, you can comprehensively cover history. Okay. Here we are from the Plus Pramesh e-library, and it's an initiative that you guys have demanded, and because of your support and love we have actually come so far. Here is something about me, who's going to be your educator for this particular course, as you can see here. And my name is Supriya Singhal. I've already appeared in Forest Services interview as well as Civil Services interview. I've given appeared for mains as well, and I have an Instagram blog by the name of Crispy Stories, and where I have like 4,000 followers. So you can follow me there, look for some amazing food recipes, because quarantine period has made everybody a home chef. Okay, so this is a pretty old blog, and I have been invited to Google also for one of their food bloggers summit, which is in the California Bay campus. So pretty, you can say my love for food has taken a great extent now. And before we move forward, this is an opportunity from Pramesh e-library. So if you are an educator, and if you feel that you want to teach and you want to create impact in a lot of lives, you can apply here and send your CV to this particular email ID. And if you meet the desired their criteria, then they will definitely give you a call back. Okay. So now we will start with the Unit 1 and Chapter 1 of 12th class Tamil Nadu book on history, which is about India under the English East India Company. Okay, I'm specifically talking about here English East India Company. Okay, so do not get confused with what? With East India companies, because what is happening in general parlance, if you have studied NCERT also, you will find that like after a point of time, they start writing East India Company, East India Company, East India Company. But actually, if you see Portuguese, if you see Dutch, if you see French, even French has an East India Company. Like the company that is coming to India for trade is also known as East India Company, because all these countries are in Europe. Okay, so if you have to see the world map, why are they called East India Company? Because of its geography. India is here somewhere. Okay, like this, if you draw a world map, and you will find somewhere here is Europe. So Europe, if you take as your point, then this is east, this is west, this is north, and this is south. And that is why, since this is India and India lies on the east of Europe, therefore you will find that all their companies which are coming to India for trade, they're called as East India companies. Okay, but in this chapter we will be dealing with the English East India Company. Okay, and how was India under it? So we'll be starting with different governor generals, and this is the beauty of this book, because no other book in history actually covers the entire history under the British rule according to governor generals. Okay. So here you will find that the entire history has been covered according to the Governor General. So you will see which Governor General came, and then what happened in his rule. Then came the next Governor General, and this is how you will learn the entire history starting from 1772 to 1947. Okay, so I always recommend people that if you are actually giving UPSC or any state service examinations where history is involved and modern history is there, please read Tamil Nadu book, because it will give you a good timeline. Okay. And moreover, just to ease your preparation, we have also have a course of wall chart for entire history. Okay, that is also there on YouTube, and you can also buy the wall chart on the Amazon or Flipkart. Okay, So now let's start with the chapter. So here you will find, first of all, we'll start with the English East India Company. Okay, like when it came, what it do, etc. So English East India Company, you should remember few dates because they're important. It was established when 31st December 1600. I'm talking about what? I'm talking about established. Okay, I'm not talking about when it came to India. I'm talking about when it got established. Okay, and why? How will it get established? Because that time, the Britishers, they had basically king and queen. Even today they have, but today the system that they have is basically constitutional monarchy. Okay, that means what? Monarchy is there or monarchy is there, but still they cannot be said to be running the government, because they have a proper parliamentary form of government present. So then also you will find that there was a queen, and the queen issued a royal charter saying, okay, fine, we give this royal charter to this company, which will be hence called as the English East India Company, which can now go and trade with India. Okay, so and the Queen of England, who was then Elizabeth I, she gave this royal charter. Okay, company then sent Captain Hawkins. Okay, this was asked in even Kaun Banega Crorepati also. Okay, so you should remember few things because this helps you even in like these chotu-motu quizzes. Okay, so Captain Hawkins, you will find that company sent this Captain Hawkins, and who was the Mughal emperor then? Jahangir. Okay, so during this time in 1600s time, you will find that Jahangir was the Mughal ruler then, and Captain Hawkins came to Jahangir's court in 1608. Okay, and why did he come? Because see, even if they are coming to India, they obviously want a storage facility. They want a facility where they can actually take goods, bring goods from Indian different states and territories, bring to this port facility and then export it out to Britain. So hence they wanted to secure a permission for establishing a factory. Now factory in actually geography terms, if you talk about, you will think that factory means what? A site where something is getting produced, like a factory. But here factory doesn't mean that. Factory means basically a storage house, a storehouse of goods. Okay, so here you will find that the Captain Hawkins comes to Jahangir's court. He wants the permission to establish a factory which is storehouse of goods, and where? Surat. And this Surat is a very, very important city. Surat is also called as the gateway to East. And this has been asked in one of the state service examinations before. Okay, which city was known as the gateway to East during the British East India Company, when British or English East India Company was ruling India? It was Surat. Okay, because you will find that even French East India Company, even Portuguese, they all wanted to establish a factory at Surat, because Surat was a great parallel. It was connected to a lot of major cities, and it was a good place to export your material out. Okay. So now you will find that it was turned down initially, obviously, because Jahangir was very wary of what will happen, and will these companies start overruling his, taking away his powers, etc. And you will find that he actually did not give the permission. Okay, however, again in 1613, Jahangir issued a farman. Okay, farman is basically like a court's order, like a court order in the sense Jahangir's court order, not the Supreme Court order. So Jahangir's court order, which permitted the East India Company to establish its first trading post at Surat. Okay, and subsequently you will find Sir Thomas Roe. This is the name also you should remember. Sir Thomas Roe, he actually expanded the rights. Whatever Britishers have got, he was successful in extending those trading rights and privileges for East India Company. And accordingly, you will find that first trading post was established in Surat. But after that, many business centers were opened in Agra, Ahmedabad, Bharuch. Okay, Bharuch is basically what we call as Bharuch today. It is also present in Gujarat. Ahmedabad is also in Gujarat, and Agra is in UP. Okay, slowly you will find that English East India Company, starting from the trading post of Surat, they actually expanded their area of trade. Then in 1639, you will realize that Francis Day, he have established the city of Madras, and this is very, very important. It has been asked in UPSC prelims before. Okay, like long time back. So Francis Day was the one who established the city of Madras. Now before we move forward, you should understand that that time English had three main trading centers. One was Madras, other was Bombay, and third was Bengal. So this Madras trading post, or Madras as a city, was established by Francis Day. Okay, remember the name, and the year was 1639. And here only you will find Saint George. Okay, the fort of Saint George was established. Okay, then on the west coast, you will realize that company obtained the Bombay, and this Bombay, you will find that English actually got this Bombay as a dowry, because English prince, okay, Charles was married, like the King Charles was married to Portuguese princess, and therefore Portuguese gifted this island of Bombay, like which was then 7 islands together. They gifted them to English. Okay, and that is why on a rent for 10 pounds per annum in 1668. and first they gifted and then basically and then they finally gifted it as a dowry also. So here you will realize that company obtained Bombay on lease from the King Charles. And so after, see, first of all, what is happening? This Bombay is under Portuguese. Portuguese gifted to English, okay, the crown, basically the king and queen, because their daughter got married to the English prince or English king. And this English king then basically rented or leased this out to the English East India Company. Because I know a lot of people have doubts in this, so I have like explained it in a correct manner. So now you will realize that by the year 1690, Job Charnock, the agent of the East India Company, he purchased the 3 villages called as Sultanate, Govindpur and Kalikata. So these are basically the places which will later become Calcutta. So Madras has been established, Bombay they have already established English East India Company, and now you will realize that one of their officials has also established Calcutta as a city. Okay, and then you will find that this Job Charnock guy, he actually like fortifies this Calcutta fort. Okay, and this fort in Calcutta is called as Fort William. Okay, Madras one is called as the Fort St. George, and one in the Calcutta is called as the Fort William after the English king William III. Okay, and the factories and the trading centers which the English established all along the sea coast, they were grouped under the 3 presidencies. That's what I told you, that whatever they have, whatever trading post they have, they actually put it under 3 authorities. Either you will be under Madras or Bombay or Calcutta. Okay, one of the 3 trading centers will become the major hubs. What happens then are the 2 battles which you should know, and for which we'll be covering them in great detail, like from prelims as well as mains point of perspective in our another course which will be completing comprehensively modern history. Okay, so you will realize that there was Battle of Plassey fought in 1757, and then there was Battle of Buxar fought in 1764. So after these battles, we already know that what happened in these battles was basically Bengal's Nawab was defeated, and finally the company got the political power in the region. And finally what happens is the 1857 revolt. Okay, what V.D. Savarkar used to call as the India's first war of independence. Now your homework is to tell me in the comment box below that have you heard something about the Paika rebellion. Okay, so Paika rebellion or Pike rebellion is the one which was in news last year because government decided to actually make Paika rebellion and call it as the first war of independence. Okay, it happened in 18. You have to tell me the year also because this was a current affair related news. Okay, so now here you will realize that after 1857 revolt, now finally what happens, the East India Company's rule, East India Company was abolished, and what came was the crown rule after that. Okay, like the East India Company was no longer there, and 1858 Act was passed. Okay, and directly now India will be under the administration of the British Crown. Okay, but now what we'll do is, so this is like a brief, you can say what happens and why, how, and how basically English consolidated their power in India. Now Robert Clive, he was the first governor of this Fort William. Okay, just to ease your preparation, I'll just make a flowchart here that what will happen is, see, first we will discuss about the Governor General of Fort William, okay, or Governor General of Bengal. Then this particular guy, whosoever will become this Governor General of Fort William, he will get now more opportunity and more powers and more responsibility, and then you will find the position of Governor General of India. And then after that, once the Governor General of India also, because the East India Company rules get abolished and there's a crown rule, then you will find the post of Viceroy as well as Secretary of State. Okay, so please remember this. First we'll be studying about Governor General of Fort William starting from 1772 till 1833. Then from 1833 to 1858 you will find there is Governor General of India, and after 1858 till you can say 1947 what we have is the Viceroy and Secretary of State. Okay, so now you will find that Robert Clive was the first governor of Fort William, okay, when it was company's rule, and he was succeeded by Verlest and Cartier. But exactly from where we will be starting our preparation is the 1772 year, where the company appointed Warren Hastings as their first Governor General or Governor of Fort William. Okay, so this is the story that we will start this book with. So now we'll study about the Warren Hastings. Okay, Warren Hastings is whom? He has been appointed as the Governor of Fort William, and when? 1772. So first we will study about the reforms that this Warren Hastings guy took. Okay, who is the Governor of Fort William. So when Warren Hastings was given the administration of Bengal, he found that this administration of Bengal was an utter chaos. Okay, the financial position of company was deteriorating. Okay, the treasury was getting empty day by day. It was becoming worse and worse, and they were basically asking for loans from the British Parliament or British government, okay, to sustain themselves in India. Okay, and then there was a problem. See, one side they are already facing this treasury problem, and another side you have found that there is famine. Okay, famine or famine. So this famine is basically when you have enough production, but you're not able to supply it to the people. So that means people are starving for food, and there is high inflation in the market. So all these problems are also going, and therefore you will find that Warren Hastings had to undertake reforms. It's not like he wanted to take. Also, I mean, there's one factor that he wanted to take, but it's just not that. He also was forced to take reforms because of the condition prevalent then, and he realized that there is an immediate need of introducing some reforms. So you will study about different reforms that Warren Hastings took. The first reform he took was abolition of the dual system. So the East India Company decided to act as a diwan and to undertake the collection of revenue by its own agents. Okay, and hence the dual system which was introduced by the Robert Clive was abolished. What was this dual system of Robert Clive? That we have studied in another like discussion before, and so you can refer to that particular video. Okay, so here you will find that the dual system which was introduced by Robert Clive was abolished because you have found that that dual system is not helping and the treasury is still empty. Okay, and as a measure to improve the finances of the company, Warren Hastings has done what? He has first of all reduced the amount that he is giving to Nawab. Okay, that allowance of 32 lakh of rupees was now converted to 16 lakh. Okay, and he also stopped this annual payment of 26 lakh which was given to the Mughal emperor. And why were they giving basically this amount to the Mughal emperor? Because Mughal was still ruling then. Okay, Mughals were still having authority over India because we have not reached the 1857 yet. We are still in 1772. Okay, until then you know that we have Mughal empire in India which is present like pan India, and you basically states and independent, until you are an independent state and you have declared it, you have to pay some royalty to the Mughal emperor. So he has stopped paying this royalty to the Mughal emperor, which was its annual amount, and also he has reduced the Nawab's allowance of 32 lakh rupees and cut it to half. Then second reform that he took was the revenue reform. So after the abolition of the dual system, okay, the responsibility of collecting the revenue now fell on whose shoulders? Because they was to abolish the dual system. Now they are not taking the help of the Nawab's like officials. Now so the entire system of collection of revenue fell on the shoulders of company. It was a responsibility of the company, and for that Warren Hastings did was he actually appointed a board of revenue. Okay, he established this board in Calcutta so that they can supervise. So this board could supervise the collection of revenues. Okay, English collectors were appointed in each of the district. Okay, and the treasurers was removed from this treasury. So treasury is the place where you basically collect the revenues and keep it. Okay, jisko we call it as kosh, right? So Bharat ka kosh. So something like that. So that treasury was where the money was kept. So this treasury was present in Murshidabad earlier. Okay, which was basically, you can say, under the Nawab's authority. But now since obviously they have gotten the entire control of polity and economy within themselves, so they have decided to move this treasury from Murshidabad to Calcutta. Okay, and what they'll do is to ensure that nobody is taking money out of this treasury like unnecessarily. They have also basically appointed an accountant general, okay, who will keep like an eye over this treasury and see like where is the money going, etc. Calcutta has thus become the capital of Bengal in 1772, and shortly then it became the capital of India also until in 1911 when the capital was shifted to Delhi. Okay. So now the Board of Revenue, basically, you will realize that it farmed out the lands by auction. Obviously, so what this Board of Revenue did? So Board of Revenue had the responsibility of collection of revenue, and Treasury had the responsibility of seeing the expenditure of that revenue collected. Okay, so this Board of Revenue will do what? So whatever lands they had, they used to auction it for 5 years instead of 1 year. Okay, so now what they will have basically, they will get a lump sum payment for 5 years in advance. Okay, for a land that they have auctioned, so that they can actually find out its real value. See what is happening if you have a land and if you're just selling it for a 1 year, people will see it as a short-term commodity and they will not basically pay much more amount for it. But suppose if now you say that this land is available for 5 years, people will see, oh my god, 5 years are there, you can actually grow so much, you can do so much with this, so they will start paying more, and that is why you can actually realize the real value of this land. Zamindars were obviously, because they had money and they could pay also upfront, they were given priority in this auction. Okay, however, certain measures were taken to ensure that the peasants, the farmers, are not basically getting exploited. Arbitrary cesses and unreasonable fines, if zamindars used to take, they were abolished, and restrictions were imposed on enhancement of rent. So there was something called as rent ceiling done. Rent ceiling in the sense, this is what you find in like Delhi and Mumbai like cities also. wherein you will find that you cannot exceed your rent or you cannot charge rent more than a particular limit. Okay, this is to ensure that you cannot exploit your tenants. So this is what was done on even on the agricultural lands, where zamindars could not take more rent than whatever was fixed. Okay, and yet you will find that this system failed. Okay, and many zamindars who actually came forward to buy the land, etc., they actually defaulted on their payments, and the money that they had to pay, get like with interest, it actually went on accumulating, but they were never able to pay this back to the company. Then came the reform of reorganization of judicial system. The judicial system at the time of Warren Hastings, okay, it was called as the storehouse of abuses. Like, it was known that if you go to judiciary, you will never get justice. Okay, it was famous for corruption, it was famous for abuse. And the Nawab, okay, he was, before, when English East India Company was not there and when courts were not there, so Nawab was the one who was actually the chief administrator of justice. Okay, right? So King Ashoka used to sit, he used to call a darbar, and then people who have to be given punishments were given in the darbar, but ultimately decision was left with the king. So now that system prevailed when Nawab was there. Okay, so what was happening, that this Nawab, it depended on Nawab, whether he was good, whether he was not, whether he was abusing the power, or whether he was actually giving justice. So often his judgments, you will find that they were careless. And zamindars, see, Nawab has a very good relationship with zamindars, because ultimately he knows that these are the people who are giving me revenue. So what was happening is that Nawab, if he's not able, if he's busy, okay, so what he used to say was, he used to appoint one of his zamindars to act as a judge of a particular case. And lot of time it used to happen that suppose peasant has a problem with a particular zamindar one, and he goes to the Nawab's court for complaint. Nawab basically appointed the zamindar one only to administer this case. Now tell me, will zamindar one punish himself? Answer is no. Okay, and that is why you will find that these zamindars, they act as the judges at lower levels within their own areas, and that is why there was a high level of corruption and high level of bias and prejudice. Okay, on the whole, so that you can see judicial institutions suffered extreme corruption. So then Warren Hastings came, he felt the necessity of reforming or reorganizing this judicial system, and each district, okay, whatever district was there, it was provided with a civil court. And this civil court was to be placed under a collector, and then there was a criminal court also. So India also, if you know, we have an integrated judiciary system starting from Supreme Court, then High Court, and then subordinate court. But these subordinate courts run in two streams. One is basically for civil matters and other is for criminal matters. So here also you can see some system like this, where there is a civil court which is under collector, and then there is a criminal court which is under the Indian judge. Okay. So to hear the appeals from the district courts, two appellate boards were also constructed. Even you know that. So we have something called NCLT, and then we have NCLAT. Whatever decisions NCLT might have given, you are not satisfied with it and you want to appeal to that decision. Therefore, you have appellate tribunals or appellate courts. Similarly, for civil court also you had an appellate court, and for criminal courts you also had an appellate court. Okay, and they were established at Calcutta. The highest civil court for appeal was basically Sadar Diwani Adalat. Okay, Diwani is a term used for revenue and civil matters, which was to be presided by the governor. Okay, and the judges which were recruited from the members of his council, the governor's council. Similarly, there was a highest appellate board for criminal matters also, and this was called as Sadar Nizamat Adalat or Nizami Adalat, and this was to be functioning under Indian judge. Okay, not governor, but Indian judge, which was appointed by the governor and his council. So here it is directly under governor and council members, but here it is under Indian judge, which have been appointed by the governor and his council. Okay, experts in, because you know that India then also had religions, and that time we did not have codification of all the Hindu and Muslim laws. So you will realize that experts in Hindu and Muslim laws, they were provided so that they could assist the judges in whatever decision they are taking. A digest of Hindu law was also prepared in Sanskrit by learned Pandits, and it was translated into Persian. Okay, similarly, an English translation of the entire code which was prepared in Sanskrit was done, which was called as the Code of Hindu Laws, which was framed and prepared by Halhed. Okay. Then comes the fourth reform, which is in the sector of trade regulations and other reforms. So the Warren Hastings, he abolished the system of dastaks, okay, or free passes. Dastak is basically, suppose if you want to go from this territory to this territory, you have been given dastak or free pass by this particular empire under whom this two districts are coming, so that you can freely move from one place to another. So now Warren Hastings has abolished this system of dastak of free passes, and he has regulated this internal trade which is happening. Okay, movement of people, goods carrying here and there, etc. He reduced the number of custom houses, and enforced a uniform tariff of 2.5% for Indian as well as non-Indian goods. Okay, the private trade which the company members were doing. So what was happening? This dastak was not given to the company officials. Like suppose there are A, B, C, three candidates. Okay, and then there is English East India Company. So these A, B, C candidates are actually employees of English East India Company, but dastak is given to the company, not to its employees. But what was happening was East India Company was not using dastak. These employees, they were basically using dastak because they were corrupt. Okay, and hence you will find that this private trade, which just company servants or company's employees were doing, okay, this was also like limited to a certain extent. It was not stopped, but it was basically limited. Then weavers were given such better treatment and facilities so that they could improve their conditions. Okay, then there were a uniform system of prepaid postal system also which was introduced, and a bank was started in Calcutta so that people could get money, like people in the sense mostly for English East India Company to get money and to basically perform its trade functions. Okay, then you will also realize that he also tried to improve, that Warren Hastings also tried to improve the police system in Calcutta so that he could reduce the dacoities and the, like these story chakaris which were happening in this particular area. Then there were two acts that came around the time Warren Hastings was the Governor General of Fort William. Okay, what were those two acts? One was the Regulating Act of 1773, another was the Pitt's India Act of 1784, which we will take one by one. So first we will discuss about the Regulating Act of 1773. So this Regulating Act of 1773, it opened a new chapter in the constitutional history of company. Okay, previously you will find that the home government at England, it consisted of Court of Directors, okay, and the Court of Proprietors. And the Court of Directors, they were elected annually, and they used to basically practically manage the affairs of the company. In India, actually, you will realize that each of these three presidencies, Bengal, Bombay and Madras, they were basically independent. Like Bombay and Bengal were not related to each other, and similarly all these three presidencies were independent of each other, and they were not responsible to each other. They were responsible to the home government, the government under which, like the British government that they have been appointed by. And this government of the presidency was conducted by a governor and a council. Okay, then the following conditions, you will realize that somewhere the system is very complex because they're not responsible to each other, and then there is so much of corruption happening. So what happens was that this all invited the parliamentary intervention in the company's affair, and you will realize that English East India Company now became a territorial power when it acquired a wide dominion in India. We already know that they started with Surat, but soon they expanded their powers to other areas, and they established three presidencies also. And its early administration, we already know it was very corrupt, it was very notorious, and the company was in financial trouble. Like company, basically there were two things happening. Company was getting financially troubled. Okay, company did not have money to even fund and pay its employees, but on the other hand, employees were getting rich. Okay, that means what? There is something amiss in the system. When company is becoming poor, like the company for which you are working is becoming poor, but you as an employer growing, how is that possible? Only when there is a lot of corruption. Okay, the disastrous famines that they were happening, they also broke out in Bengal, and you will find that they affected the agriculturists. Agriculturists are affected, that means zamindars are affected. If zamindars are affected, that means your land revenue is not getting collected. And as a result, your revenue collection was poor. A lot of people were not able to pay you upfront, and therefore you will find that company was on the verge of bankruptcy. And that is why in 1773, company approached actually the British government for a loan. And that is where it started, wherein British government realized that English East India Company has to be controlled. Because when they applied for roll, you will realize that Parliament actually started questioning the affairs of the company, because they were seeing the company officials getting rich, getting affluent, buying land here and there, but company is getting poor. So that's when Parliament decided that they needed to regulate the affairs of the company. And Lord North, who was then the Prime Minister of England, he appointed a select committee to inquire as to what is happening in the company, what are its affairs, etc. Like how is it managing. And when they submitted a report, and because of that report came around the Regulating Act of 1773. Okay. Now what we will do, we'll study the provisions of this act. So this Regulating Act actually, it reformed the company's government in home in the sense in Britain as well as in India. Okay, we will study about the 4 or 5 important provisions of this act. First is basically the term of office of the members of the Court of Directors. Remember? So that was extended from 1 year to 4 years, and 1/4 of them had to retire every year, and the retiring directors are not able for re-election. That means what? The Court of Directors basically are now, you want to appoint those Court of Directors which are not corrupt. Secondly, the Governor of Bengal was basically given the title as Governor General of Fort William, whose tenure was now extended for a period of 5 years. Okay, the council of 4 members. So this governor of Fort William, okay, has become the Governor General of Bengal, and his tenure is 5 years. But to rule, this Governor General is being provided with a council of 4 members, okay, which was to assist this Governor General, and government was to be conducted in the accordance of decision of majority. This is very, very important. Decision of majority. Okay, that means Governor General cannot only run the entire company on his own will. He has to consider the recommendations and advices of the council members. Okay, and this Governor General, you will realize he had a casting vote. Now, if you have studied polity, you must know that. Sorry, I was writing here. Which entity, like as in speaker, deputy speaker, chairman of Rajya Sabha, or deputy chairman of Rajya Sabha, which of them gets casting vote in what situation? So you need to write it in the comment box below. Then comes the fourth point, which is the Governor General in Council. He was made the supreme over the presidencies in matters of war and peace. That means he could decide, and he was the only sole person who was deciding when there was a matter of peace and war. Then the provisions were made in the Act for establishment of Supreme Court at Calcutta. Now this is very important because this has been asked in the UPSC prelims before. The Supreme Court was not established for Indians. It was only for Europeans, okay, and their matters. Okay, so the Supreme Court was established in Calcutta, which had a Chief Justice as well as 3 junior judges, and it was to be independent of this Governor General in Council. Otherwise, executive and judiciary will try to interfere in each other's matter. And in 1774, the Supreme Court was established by a royal charter. And finally, this act prevented the servants of the company from indulging into any sort of private trade, making any kinds of bribe or taking any kinds of material in cash and kind, therefore wanting to decorrupt the system. Now, after having studied the act, we want to study about the merits and demerits of the act also. Okay, so you will realize that the significance of the regulating act is that it brought the affairs of the company under the control of Parliament. Earlier, when East India Company was not under anybody's control, now it came under the direct control of Parliament. Okay, and besides it, proved that the Parliament of England was not only concerned about the company, but somewhere they were also thinking what was happening to Indians because of so much of corruption. So they were actually, concerned about the welfare of Indians also. The greatest merit about this act is that it put end to this arbitrary rule of company that was taking place in India, and they wanted to ensure that future, whatever is happening in future, is actually according to some law. The main defect, if we call about this act, was that Governor General was made powerless because now decisions were taken by majority. So his power was taken away, and because of which, you will find that there were certain deadlocks. Like governor wanted to do something, but he was not able to do because he did not have the majority. Okay. However, many of these defects, now you realize that one act has been passed, okay, but now you will realize that they had to pass another act to actually, clarify and rectify these defects which they have found in Regulating Act of 1773. So therefore came the Pitt's India Act of 1784. Okay, now before moving to Pitt's India Act, we will study about some of the policies of Warren Hastings. So Warren Hastings as a person is known for basically his policy of expansion. Okay, so we will study about this expansionist policy of Warren Hastings, where he basically fought 3 wars, okay, from the Britishers side. So Warren Hastings, he was known for his expansionist policy. His administration witnessed 3 wars. First was the Rohilla War, second was the first Anglo-Maratha War, and third was the second Anglo-Mysore War. Remember, there is Maratha War, okay, then there is Mysore War, and then there is Rohilla War. So these 3 are happening in 3 different regions, while your Governor General is sitting in Bengal. Okay. So now comes the Rohilla War of 1774. So Rohilkhand, as you already know, is a very, very small kingdom, was a very small kingdom, and it was situated between 2, you can say, fertile plains. One was Awadh and other was Marathas, okay, somewhere here. So there in between was the Rohilkhand Empire, and their ruler was Hafiz Rahmat Khan. He concluded a defensive treaty in 1772 with the Nawab of Awadh. Okay, so he came into treaty with Nawab of Awadh because he was fearful of attack by Marathas. And what was this treaty about? That whenever Marathas attack him, Awadh has to rescue him. Okay, but no such attack took place. But the Nawab of Awadh, he demanded money. He said, you went on a treaty with me and now you need to give me money irrespective of Marathas attacked you or not. When Rahmat Khan, he evaded, Nawab of Awadh, with the help of Britishers, he actually invaded Rohilkhand. And Warren Hastings, he sent troops, like British troops, against Rohilkhand, and he was severely criticized for his political involvement in this Rohilla affair. Because British government was like, you were never to be involved in this Rohilla war. It was never a matter of British. Why did you involve in the internal matters of India? Then came the first Anglo-Maratha War, which took place in 1775 to 1782. Before we move forward, please remember these little bit of years when these wars happened, because now UPSC has start asking chronological questions, wherein they are asking you to arrange questions in chronological time as and when they occurred. Like you have to arrange wars according to when, who occurred first and what occurred next. Okay, so please remember a brief timeline about what happened, which war happened, at least in what year, if not the date. Then we are talking about the first Anglo-Maratha war. So the Marathas were a very large, like you can say the Marathas were a very powerful empire back then. Not empire, but a dynasty back then. And they basically remained disunited, because we know that Maratha had 5 Sardars. Okay, like there were Holkars, there were Scindias, there was Gaikwads. Okay, there was Gokhales, and then there was one more that you need to tell me. Okay, in the comment box below, because it's very easy. I left the most easiest one. Then the Marathas were largely remained disunited since the third battle of Panipat. We already know that in third battle of Panipat, Marathas were defeated. Okay, and then what happened was the internal conflict among the Marathas. It became a very fertile ground for the Britishers to actually, expand their own territory. In 1775, there was a dispute for the post of Peshwa. This Peshwa was the one that I left. Okay, so there was a dispute for the post of Peshwa between two people. One was Madhav Rao, and then it was his uncle or chacha, as you can call, Raghunath Rao. Okay, the British authorities who were there in Bombay, okay, they concluded a treaty of Surat with Raghunath Rao. So this Bombay people are concluding a treaty with Raghunath Rao, which is called as the Treaty of Surat. Please remember it, because it has been asked in the state prelims before. Then came the Raghunath Rao. He promised to cede these islands of Basset and Salsette, which are present in Bombay, to the British authorities. But later, when he was unwilling to fulfill his promise, British actually captured him. Okay, not captured him, they captured these islands, okay, of Salsette and Bassein, which anyways Raghunath Rao promised to give to the Britishers. Then this action of Bombay government was not approved by the one who was the Governor General of Bengal, which was Warren Hastings. Okay, he refused to accept these actions, and in 1776, the Warren Hastings, he sent Colonel Upton, okay, to settle this issue. And then this colonel, who is coming from the Warren Hastings sides, he actually concluded a treaty of Purandar with Nana Fadnavis, okay, another Maratha leader. So now there is another Maratha leader with whom your treaty of Purandar has been signed. And according to this new treaty, now Madhav Rao too was to be accepted as a new Peshwa, and British still will be left with the Salsette and Bassein Islands. Okay, as you can say, basically war indemnity, like something that you pay for war, causing a war. However, again, this Warren Hastings guy is not he's not satisfied, and also the home authorities, like in London, they are not satisfied with the treaty, and they rejected the Treaty of Purandar. Now, Warren Hastings also, he considered this Treaty of Purandar to be a scrap of paper, and he sanctioned, then he realized that there is nothing happening, so he sanctioned basically operations against the Marathas. And in the meantime, you will realize that British forces sent by the Bombay government were also defeated by the Marathas. So therefore, in 1781, Warren Hastings dispatched the British troops under the command of Captain Popham, okay, and he defeated the Maratha chief Mahaji Scindia. He's a very famous Maratha, very brave Maratha ruler, and he used to deploy a certain kind of technique to win over the rebels or win over the opposition, which you need to mention in the comment box below. Okay, and therefore you will realize that they defeated Maratha chief in number of small battles, and they finally captured the Gwalior, which was the Scindia's Gad, okay, Scindia's fort. And later in 1782, they finally signed the Treaty of Salabai. So after Treaty of Surat, Treaty of Purandar, okay, finally comes the Treaty of Salabai in 1782, which was signed between Warren Hastings and Mahaji Scindia. Okay, and accordingly, Salsette and Bassein were given to the British. Raghunath Rao was given pension, okay, and he was said to be like, you'll be given just pension, and the Madhav Rao too was accepted as Peshwa. So everybody gets a win-win situation. And with this Treaty of Salabai, you will realize that now there was a peace. Now British, see, first of all, British established peace, and secondly, British established an influence over the Indian politics, where it was finally realized that British can actually solve the matters of political interference between the two Indian rulers as well. And it provided the British 20 years of peace with Marathas, and this treaty also enabled the British to exert pressure on Mysore, because now they have a control over Marathas. Now they are exerting a pressure over its downstream territory of Mysore. Okay, and with the help of Marathas, they will be able to defeat Mysore also, which was under very powerful rulers Hyder Ali and then Tipu Sultan. Thus, Britishers on the one hand, they saved themselves from the combined opposition of Marathas and Mysore, which could happen in future. And they also, on the other hand, they were successful in dividing the Indian powers, because they were now becoming alliances of different powers in different regions. Okay, this was the second war that happened during the time of Warren Hastings. Now comes the third war, which happened during his time, which was the Second Anglo-Mysore War, which was happening in 1780 to 1784. Okay. So the first Anglo-Mysore War, it took earlier in 1767 to 69, and Hyder Ali basically emerged victorious against the British. And in the end of a war, you can see a treaty was signed between British and Hyder Ali, wherein basically there were few things that were promised. Okay, and you will realize that it is because of these things not getting promised that Second Anglo-Mysore War took place. So what were the main causes of Second Anglo-Mysore War? First, the British failed to fulfill the terms of this treaty, which was signed earlier and during the first Anglo-Mysore War. Second, there was an outbreak of hostilities between the English and the French, because now you have French also in the picture, and English and French are rivals. Okay, not only in India but also in the world politics. Okay, back then, not now. Back then they were rivals, and you will realize that French was actually, they were supporting Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. They were very close associates of Mysore Empire. And therefore you will find that English and French are also at loggerheads. Third is basically Britishers capturing Mahe, which was then a French settlement within Hyder's territory. Okay, so British also were never very clean. They always wanted to, start a war. And then Hyder Ali, finally, he formed a grand alliance with the Nizam of Hyderabad and also Marathas. So there is Mysore. Hyder Ali realizes that if he has to win a war, he needs basically two of his territories on sides to cooperate with him, because if Britishers come and these two territories also attack, he will be in like a lot of struggle. So he basically then forms a grand alliance with Marathas and also with the Nizams of Hyderabad. And finally, you will realize that the war began when British led their forces through Hyder's territory without his permission, and they wanted to capture Guntur, which is in the northern Sarkar region. Hyder Ali, obviously, he defeated Colonel Bailey and he captured the Orkot in 1780. In the next year itself, you will find that Warren Hastings, by a clever stroke of diplomacy, he divided this confederacy. Okay, what he did was, Warren Hastings, he knew that he cannot defeat the combined forces of Mysore, Marathas and Nizam. So he made different treaties with these two people. With Marathas, we already know he made peace during the Anglo-Maratha War, and with Nizams, he made another treaty. Okay. And he won, and we already know that with Marathas, he found the friendship of Bhosle and Scindias also. And consequently, what Hyder made grand alliance was actually broken. Okay, Hyder was isolated without any alliance, and then he was defeated by Sir Ayerkut at Porto Novo in 1781. And finally, in 1782, Hyder died of cancer at the age of 60, and his death was kept secret until his son Tipu Sultan assumed the power, because otherwise what will happen? People in the vicinity and people who are fighting the war from the Mysore side will become very weak. So then in the war itself, you will realize that Hyder dies, but he does not die in the war, like while fighting. He dies because of cancer, and then his son Tipu Sultan takes over the case. And then you will realize that he fights the war very bravely, and then Second Anglo-Mysore War comes to an end by this Treaty of Mangalore. You need to remember it because this has been asked in the UPSC prelims before. This Treaty of Mangalore took place in 1783, and accordingly, all the conquests were mutually restored and prisoners on the both sides were released. You already know that Afghanistan Taliban, this Taliban-US peace agreement is also happening, where basically they are telling to release each other's prisoners of war also. So prisoners of war are basically people who are fighting from each side, and then they are left in someone else's territory, and then they are captured by the opposition, and then so they become their prisoners. So therefore, prisoners of war are exchanged. So these were the three wars that we have studied during the Warren Hastings time. Then comes the Pitt's India Act of 1784, which was the second act which was passed during the Warren Hastings time. Okay. So the Regulating Act of 1773, we already know that it had many problems and many shortcomings also, and it was unsatisfactory. So therefore, there was a need of this Pitt's India Act, and in 1784 January, Pitt the Younger, who became the Prime Minister of England after the general elections, he introduced in India a bill in the British Parliament, okay, which he called as the India Bill. And despite bitter debate in both the houses, you will find that bill was passed after 7 months, and it received a royal assent in 1784. And this was famously called as the Pitt's India Act of 1784. Now we'll study about the main provisions. First, that the Board of Control. So earlier we had Court of Directors. Now you will find you have another board called as the Board of Control. So this Board of Control consisting of 6 members was created, and these members were appointed by Crown. Okay, Court of Directors was retained without any alternation in its composition. The act also introduced significant changes in the Indian administration. It reduced the number of, so we had this Governor General of Bengal of Fort William, and it had the Governor General Council also of 4 members. So this number of members have been reduced from 4 to 3, which includes even the Commander in Chief. Okay, this Pitt's India Act constitutes a significant landmark. You know why? And this has been asked in UPSC prelims before, that Pitt's India Act was a significant landmark. Why? Because it guided a foreign policy of the company. Okay, it introduced a kind of contradiction in the functions of the company. The Code of Directors, so what it has done is, this Pitt's India Act has actually divided the two functions of the company under two heads. One is the commercial function and other is the political function. So now the commercial function of the company is controlled by the Court of Directors, while the political affairs of the company are managed by the Board of Control. Okay, and finally you will realize that the company, ultimately this Board of Control has become very powerful. Okay, now we have come to the end of what happens during Warren Hastings, what reforms he has undertaken, what acts were passed during his time, and finally what wars he has fought. Now we will talk about the impeachment of Warren Hastings. Okay, yes, it's the same impeachment. Okay, impeachment is the word used when you want to remove someone from his official authority. In India, impeachment word is used only for the president, but many other places impeachment words are used even for Supreme Court judges, etc. So impeachment of Warren Hastings, what happens is that this Pitt India Act of 1784, it was a rude shock and a bitter disappointment for Warren Hastings. Okay, the Prime Minister back then, his speech, he censured the policy of the government of Bengal, which was basically made by the Warren Hastings. And he, somehow this Prime Minister said that whatever happened during Warren Hastings' time is reflecting somewhere Warren Hastings' own personal character. Okay, and therefore you will realize that Warren Hastings' reputation and his image was tarnished in England. Okay, and therefore he resigned from his post and he left India in June 1785. In 1787, Warren Hastings was impeached by the Parliament by Edmund Burke. Okay, and the Whigs for his administrative excess. Okay, whatever war he took in Rohilkhand, etc. And whatever activities he took for which was not required for Britishers to participate, he was actually charged for those offenses. Like 22 charges were put against him, and most important of them was related to Rohilla War, that I already told you, where he had no need to actually participate in the war, but still he did. In case of Nanda Kumar, the treatment of Raja Chait Singh of Banaras, and the pressures on the Begums of Awadh. Okay, and after a long trail which lasted till 1795, so his case started in 1787, lasted till 1795. Warren Hastings was finally acquitted. Okay, and he received a pension from the company and lived till 1818. Okay, so this, now what is this crucial case of Nanda Kumar is this case. Okay, Nanda Kumar, he was an influential official in Bengal and he was hanged to death. Okay, it's not a joke. He was hanged to death by verdict of Supreme Court at Calcutta for a petty offense of forgery. Okay, for forging paper, you are actually putting someone on death. The English law was applied in this judgment, and it was contended that Warren Hastings and Sir Elijah Impey, the judge of Supreme Court, they conspired against this guy Nanda Kumar. And Warren Hastings, he imposed heavy penalty on this Raja Chait Singh of Banaras for his delay in payment of tribute and deposed him. Like it's understandable that somebody is not able to pay the amount that he has to pay, but there might be some reasons behind it. But he did not listen. He actually deposed this particular Raja from his post in unjust manner. And this Begum of Awadh were basically the mothers and the grandmothers of Nawab of Awadh. And when Warren Hastings helped the Nawab by sending his troops to help of Nawab, who squeezed money from the Begums. And this is why basically finally, Warren Hastings got a very bad reputation, that how can you actually exploit the women. Okay, so now we are at the end of this chapter, and we will study about the last thing about Warren Hastings, which is the estimate of Warren Hastings. Okay, so we'll study about there will be some positive points about his personality, like what was he personally. So he was a gifted personality endowed with a strong will, a great energy and resourcefulness. His long stay in Bengal somewhere became, in the shadow of this Mughal culture tradition which was existing. Gave him enough opportunity to learn the Oriental languages. And he was a very, very well-known Orientalist, like someone who was fond of other languages, like regional languages, okay, such as Bengali, which was then the local language, and also the Persian, which was a diplomatic language, and to develop an Oriental taste, since he considered Indian culture to be very rich and very sound, okay, and he wanted Indian culture to be the basis of Indian administration. Okay, he patronized the learning of Indian languages and arts so that Indian administration could run smoothly. His task was challenging because he was surrounded by the hostile forces. Okay, he faced external enemies with the unflinching courage and unfailing resource, and his internal opponents with extraordinary patience and firmness. It was on the foundation that which Warren Hastings laid down that the British Empire later could build upon. Okay, so with this, we finish the chapter and then we will start with the next chapter, that who came after Warren Hastings and who made important policy decisions. Okay, after this we have Lord Cornwallis coming up. Hope you like this lecture, and whatever I have asked the questions, please do mention them in the comment box, because in this way only we can interact with each other. Thank you.